The headquarters of a major construction firm stood tall along Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, its glass exterior blazing under the desert sun. It was the year 2019, and one of the region's most ambitious, eco-friendly skyscraper projects, the Emirates Green Tower, was in its final stage of selecting a lead engineering company. Among the shortlisted proposals lay a thick document from Manila, Philippines. It quietly waited on the desk of the man who would make the final call. Rashid Al-Mansouri, a highly respected structural engineer with over 3 decades of experience, sat in his office, surrounded by scale models of iconic towers he had designed. Awards lined his walls. His reputation was built on precision, reliability, and success. In Dubai, when something seemed impossible to build, people turned to him. His assistant entered and placed the final proposal on his desk. "Sir, this just arrived from the Philippines." Rashid raised an eyebrow. "Philippines?" She nodded. Curious but skeptical, he opened the file. The cover read, "Sustainable Vertical Design, Garcia Engineering Solutions. Lead Engineer, Carlos Garcia." As he flipped through the pages, his expression shifted from mild interest to confusion, then amusement. By page 12, he let out a loud laugh. His assistant looked uneasy. "Is something wrong, sir?" Rashid held up one of the diagrams. "This engineer wants to use bamboo in a 40-story skyscraper in Dubai." He shook his head, still smiling. "Bamboo. Does he think we're building a beach hut?" He continued, scanning the document. "He claims bamboo can rival steel in tensile strength, that it's flexible during seismic events, and sustainable." Closing the file, he pushed it aside. "Reject it. We're building the future, not experimenting with jungle materials." His assistant hesitated. "But sir, the data looks quite strong." Rashid interrupted firmly. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what works." The next day, the selection committee gathered. Rashid presented his recommendation. A well-known European firm with a conventional steel and concrete design. Reliable, proven, and expensive. Most of the room agreed. But one official asked, "What about the Philippine proposal?" Rashid's tone hardened. "It's risky. Bamboo has no place in high-rise construction. It's unproven at this scale." A younger developer added, "But it scored highest in sustainability and costs significantly less." Rashid leaned forward. "Cost is irrelevant if the structure fails. I won't risk my reputation on an untested idea." The room fell silent. The vote was taken. The traditional design won. The Filipino proposal was dismissed. 3 weeks later, Rashid received an email. It was from Carlos Garcia. The message was polite and professional. He thanked Rashid for reviewing the proposal and acknowledged his concerns. Then he made a simple request. Just 30 minutes to explain the concept properly. Rashid almost ignored it. But something made him pause. Perhaps curiosity, or the respectful tone. He replied, "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., 30 minutes. The next afternoon, Carlos arrived. He was young, calm, and carried a worn briefcase. Rashid gestured to the chair. "You have 30 minutes." Carlos nodded and immediately got to work. He pulled out a small bamboo cylinder, no thicker than a bottle, and secured it in a clamp on the desk. "This is structural-grade bamboo," he said. He began adding weights to one end. 1, 2, 3. Rashid leaned in. Even with 10 kilograms hanging from it, the bamboo barely bent. Carlos then repeated the test with a steel tube of similar size and weight. At 8 kilograms, the steel bent more than the bamboo had. Rashid's expression changed. "That's unexpected." Carlos calmly explained, "Bamboo is incredibly strong for its weight. It's also flexible, unlike steel, which can become brittle under certain stress conditions." He then showed simulation models on his tablet. One displayed a traditional steel structure during a strong earthquake, violent movement, stress points, structural strain. The next showed a hybrid design using bamboo reinforcement. The motion was controlled. Stress was distributed. The structure remained intact. "I'm not replacing steel," Carlos clarified. "I'm improving it." Rashid listened, silent now. For the first time, doubt crept into his certainty. Rashid sat back in his chair, processing everything he had just seen. For years, his decisions had been based on experience, and that experience had never failed him. But now, the data in front of him was challenging everything he believed. "Have you tested this in real conditions?" he finally asked. Carlos nodded and pulled out another file. A 12-story hybrid building in Manila, completed in 2017. It faced a major typhoon the following year, winds over 200 kilometers per hour. He placed photographs on the table. The structure had zero damage. Meanwhile, a nearby conventional building suffered significant structural stress. Rashid studied the images carefully. This wasn't theory. This was proof. A thought struck him suddenly. "Why wasn't this clearly presented in your proposal?" Carlos looked at him calmly. "It was, in the appendix section." Rashid paused. He remembered. He hadn't read that far. He had judged too quickly and dismissed the idea before fully understanding it. For a brief moment, the weight of that realization sat heavy in the room. Carlos spoke again, his tone respectful. "I understand your hesitation. New ideas often sound risky, but engineering isn't about what feels familiar. It's about what works." Rashid didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the bamboo sample still holding weight on his desk, then at the photographs, then at Carlos. "What if," Rashid began slowly, "the current design we approved doesn't meet updated requirements?" Carlos's eyes sharpened slightly. "Then you'd need an alternative." Rashid nodded. Without wasting time, he picked up his phone and called his engineering team.
"Run full wind load simulations on the approved design. Use the latest environmental data. I want accurate results by tomorrow." He ended the call and turned back to Carlos. "If there's a problem, I'll reopen the evaluation." Carlos gave a small nod. "That's all I ask." The next day, the results came in. The approved design had failed. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. It couldn't meet the updated wind load standards without major modifications, which would increase both cost and construction time. The committee gathered again. This time, the atmosphere was tense. Rashid stood up. "I may have made a mistake," he said plainly. The room went quiet. He presented the full proposal from Garcia Engineering, this time including all the data he had initially ignored. He showed the test comparisons, the real-world case studies, the simulation results. At first, there was resistance, doubt, questions. But slowly, the evidence began to speak for itself. One developer asked, "Is this truly safe?" Rashid answered honestly, "Based on the data, it's safer than what we approved." That changed everything. A second vote was held. This time, the decision was different. Garcia Engineering Solutions was selected. Construction began months later. Rashid and Carlos worked together closely. At first, it wasn't easy. The hybrid system required new techniques, new thinking, and precise execution. But as the building rose, the results became undeniable. The structure was lighter, requiring less foundation depth. It was stronger, exceeding safety requirements. And it was faster to build, saving valuable time. Engineers from around the world began visiting the site. What once sounded unusual was now being studied as innovation. Rashid found himself explaining bamboo reinforcement to others, something he once rejected without a second thought. When the building was finally completed, it stood taller than originally planned. Efficient, elegant, different. On the day of completion, Rashid and Carlos stood side by side, looking up at what they had created. After a long silence, Rashid spoke. "I misjudged your work," he admitted. "I relied on assumptions instead of understanding." Carlos smiled slightly. "You gave it a second chance. That's what matters." Rashid shook his head. "I gave you 30 minutes. You proved everything after that." Months later, the project received an international award for sustainable architecture. When Rashid stepped onto the stage, he didn't stand alone. He invited Carlos beside him. In his speech, Rashid said something unexpected. "For most of my career, I believed experience was enough. But true progress doesn't come from holding on to what you know. It comes from being open to what you don't. The success of the project led to new opportunities, more collaborations, more innovation, and a shift in mindset across the industry. Rashid learned that knowledge has no nationality, that innovation can come from anywhere, and that the strongest structures are not just built with materials, but with humility. Because in the end, true excellence isn't about always being right, it's about being willing to learn when you're wrong. And that lesson stayed with Rashid long after the project was finished. The skyline of Dubai gained a remarkable new tower, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new way of thinking. Engineers began to look beyond tradition. Developers became more open to unconventional ideas backed by real data. And across the industry, one simple truth started to spread. Innovation doesn't come from comfort zones. It comes from curiosity, from questioning, from listening. Rashid, once known for his certainty, became known for something greater, his willingness to evolve. And Carlos, once overlooked, became a symbol of how powerful new perspectives can be when given a chance. Together they proved that progress is not about choosing between old knowledge and new ideas. It's about combining both. Because the strongest foundations are not just made of steel or concrete, they are built on open minds, on respect, and on the courage to accept that sometimes the best ideas come from the places you least expect.